Good morning to you, my dear friends and family, my relatives, my followers, to all of you in Zoomland and Webland, wherever you are. Good morning to you, whether you're in Guyana, in the USA, in Canada, in London, I mean, like the UK, wherever, Europe, South Africa. I know that there are followers in South Africa. If you're in Africa itself, generally, other parts of Africa, Central America, wherever you are. Good morning to you. Well, of course, this is the In Perspective show, and the In Perspective show comes to you compliments of B&B Productions, Double B Productions, and not this is not the Politics 101 show. Welcome to the show this morning. The temperature here in New York is 56 degrees, kind of a little cold. And in Guyana, I'm seeing it saying that the temperature is 81 degrees. So you're having a fabulous time in Guyana while you know, we're kind of snuggling up still. Kind of cold night. I was outside last night for a little bit to check and see what's going on. I actually had a view of the roof of the building I'm working in, and I thought what I was seeing was snow. But then when I checked, it was not. It was just that the place was heavily misted out. Um, so it's kind of cold today. But like I said, you and Guyana enjoying the warmth, and as I usually indicate to you, I'm kind of jealous. But I'm hoping that someday soon I'll be able to come and enjoy that warm climate. But we've got to take it as we get it when we get it here, because when it starts to get hot, it's ridiculously hot. Anyway, this morning we are happy to have you sharing your time with us. We're glad to have your company. I just want to deal with matters relating to the education of our people this morning on the show. So let me begin by reminding us that Guyanese, for some time, have been enjoying free education. But how did it come about? Let me give you a little synopsis. In 1976, Lyndon Forbes Sampson Bonham introduced free education from nursery to university in Guyana, of course. And that introduction brought invaluable financial ease to thousands of Guyanese since they were able to save some money. And the underprivileged obviously was suddenly able to have a university education. This move was mainly intended by the Forbes Bonham administration to enhance the national development plan that they had, since it was felt that an illiterate people could not, and I do believe still cannot, move a country forward. There was some pushback because churches, at least those churches that had privately owned schools, privately run schools, saw a necessary means of income and their forum for indoctrination being snatched out of their hands. Private education was now becoming a thing of the past. At the same time, many persons were happy because those church school managers, for the most part, were the ones who were determining who could enter the schools or whether you can enter the school or not. They were the ones who made that decision, not your academic qualification of some sort. With the introduction of free education, alas, came the opportunity for every Guyanese to get an education. Untrained teachers had an opportunity to be trained at the state's expense, and that benefited the nation immensely because the standard of education improved. In 1992, when the Jagan administration came to power, they used the findings of the Desmond Hoyt Commission study to justify the implementation of fee paying at the University of Guyana, unfortunately. And that at the time was unconstitutional, but they went ahead with it anyway, because our constitution at the time said clearly that every Guyanese was entitled to free education from nursery to university. It was a basic right enshrined in the constitution. In their research, I guess the PPP found out that, um, the whole world, according to the Odin Ishmael report, was finding a lack, a sad lacking in the offering of primary education. And therefore, they were placing a lot of emphasis on improving and making available more opportunity for and access to said primary education. And Guyana followed suit when the Bonham and Hoyt administrations sought to ensure that at the time the some 33,000 6 to 11-year-olds who were out of school got an opportunity to go into school, and that was sometime around 1986. So at the same time they were trying to bolster the secondary education program. So in order to make a mark of their own, the PPP administration under the then Minister of Education, Sheikh Bashk, introduced a program or a plan that he called automatic the automatic promotion policy, also known colloquially as No Child Left Behind, which was ultimately deemed a failure in 2012, as was pointed out by former Chief Education Officer Ed Caesar. But they kept using it anyway, and although in 2013 the Parliament said that it was a failed program and they should stop using it, it was never discontinued, or its use was never discontinued. And in 2014, finally, Priya Manik Chand, as Minister of Education, instructed all public schools to scrap it. But it wasn't scrapped as such, it was merely altered. And she asked that students be required to just merely make 50% of the total marks, the total number of marks you were going for, and you were deemed as having passed the exam. In 2015, the APNU AFC government came to office, and the Granger administration sought to restore the standard of education. Uh, One of the persons who, fortunately for us, spearheaded that effort is our guest today. And it is my privilege to introduce to you and to welcome to the In Perspective show no other than the Honorable Dr. Nicolette Henry, Member of Parliament. Doc, good morning and welcome to the In Perspective show.
Well, good morning, Mr. Burke. And let me take a few minutes just to say I want to thank you for having me on your program. And I certainly want to wish the viewers a very wonderful day. For those of the viewers that are observing today, as you know, is Arrival Day in Guyana. For those observing it, I trust you have a blessed day today.
Thank you very much. And I would like to extend the same wish to the members of the Guyanese community, because we know that we have after a while, after some bit of jostling around, agreed that this day should be observed in or in memory of the arrival, or to commemorate the arrival of all the peoples who did arrive on these shores. So Doc, yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's interesting that you're speaking about all the people arriving. That is a conversation by itself, because I can tell you some of us just did not arrive here. But having said that, I want to say that in terms of the education sector and the work that we were able to do, I think you captured to a large extent the trust and the focus of where the government that I was a part of and served, the David Granger administration government, focus was in terms of education. As you are rightfully aware, we inherited an education sector, to my mind, that was in complete decay. An education sector that definitely was in crisis. And so on assuming office in 2015, I was placed in the education sector along with my colleague at that time, Dr. Rupert Ryan. I subsequently, however, took over the reins of the education sector. But during those years of governance, there were quite a few remedies that had to be done on our part in terms of reviving the sector, and that would have resulted in a number of policy shifts. First of all, one of the areas that I felt needed urgent attention, and we did provide that attention to, had to do with education delivery across the country in terms of both equity and access. And we recognize that the further you move away from Georgetown, the worse the system was in terms of delivery and access. And so we spent a lot of time, as you would have recognized, working in areas, far flung communities, to ensure that students not only had the means to go to school, but in some instances they also had breakfast. And so the 5B program, initiated by the David Granger administration, was very integral to the whole movement of the education sector during those years. We provided transportation in many instances. We provided the financial support that was there. We provided meals. We provided books. We provided boats. We provided bicycles. We even boots, in many, 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 many instances. And there was a direct link as it related to the attendance of students and the performance of students. And I think those results are quite publicized, and so I wouldn't want to spend the few minutes I have here to rehash. But for the first time in many, many years, in fact, in the history of our country, we have seen, good performances coming from students outside of Georgetown. And so the vision of the David Granger administration, particularly those leading the education sector at that time, was to ensure that, irrespective of where you live in Guyana, that you can be the best that you were created to be. And so there was a deliberate focus insofar as that was concerned to ensure that we reduce the gaps and the disparities that existed in education. Another area that we focused on heavily had to do with students' performance and students' performance across the spectrum. And the example that I would use would be at the primary level, and you and many Guyanese are aware, and even people outside of Guyana who are not Guyanese are aware, that we spent a lot of money, we spent a lot of man hours, we spent a lot of technical expertise ensuring that we provided the interventions that were necessary to improve our students' performance, particularly in subject areas such as mathematics and the sciences, where we had huge, huge, huge issues. Um, when I took over as education minister, 13% of our students were matriculating, or you can say getting 50% of the scores required for the National Grade 6 assessment in terms of passing, as we say, the common entrance examination. I don't have to tell you if that is good or bad. From your own observations, you would recognize that that is not where country needed to be. And so we made a deliberate and focused effort, and I led that effort to ensure that we provided the kinds of support and the tools and the interventions that were necessary to ensure that our students were able to perform. Because at the end of the day, you wanted a student that is globally competent. And sometimes, in politics, and you would recognize that people get caught up in the visibilities, and they're more interested in what people can see. And sometimes they sell people empty dreams, as you're seeing now. But people are going on 20,000 scholarships. You don't even have to have any entry requirements. The level that we're talking about, and you know what scholarship, in essence, is intended to mean in the first instance. And while I'm not here just to criticize or to condemn what is happening, I'm here to say that when we deliver services and public good to the people of this country, we should do our utmost to ensure that those services are delivered in a way that is internationally acceptable, and that they meet the minimum standard of whatever it is that you're delivering. And so we made a deliberate effort to do exactly that when we served in government. You may also recall that we spent a lot of time looking at the development, support, training of teachers, apart from working on remuneration packages and working conditions. We ensured that teachers were part of a scheme that we call one laptop per teacher, because we recognize that at this point in time, you can hardly deliver education without using an ICT platform. And that was pre COVID. And I can tell you, with the onset of the pandemic, we, 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 we are in a worse situation globally. And certainly here in Guyana, I think if no other program that ought to have been continued is that project. Sadly, it has not continued after we demitted office in August of last year. And I think that's a real shame, and it's really unfortunate. And I think the country would not be in a better place for the current administration having made that decision. Another area that I would want to spend a few minutes talking about would be the infrastructure in terms of schools and buildings that we have embarked upon. You would have recalled when we took over office, there were many schools in disrepair, and there will always be schools that need to be repaired and need to be rehabilitated because that's the work of every Ministry of Education in every country of the world. And I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that, for instance, when you look at the K2 secondary school that was constructed under the last administration in comparison to the schools that we constructed here, I think you're comparing the two extreme ends of the spectrum. And so we as a government thought that it would be prudent of us to ensure that schools that are constructed meet the minimum standard of what is required for education delivery in the 21st century. And so we took a lot of time not only in acquiring monies, but also in the design and the layout, and ensuring that particularly science was a focus. Every school must have had a science lab. It must take into account the subject areas such as agriculture, home economics, ICT, and all those things. And I was happy to see and that more that recently one of the schools in Region 3 is actually being completed, and it does meet the minimum requirements. So much so that those that have inherited that project are running around the place holding it up as a flagship project. And not that they can hold our projects up as flagship projects, because I know that it can withstand the scrutiny both here in country and even internationally. And that is the standard by which we operate as a government, particularly in all sectors, but I'll speak to the education sector since I presided over that sector. So those are some of the areas that we place a lot of emphasis on. Of course, there were a lot of policy shifts. As minister, I've had to make decisions to change some of the policies to ensure that subpopulations that were not being reached in terms of quality education did receive such education. I could speak quickly to some of those. You may recall that we had introduced under my stewardship the reintegration of teenage mothers. That, to my mind, is a very important and significant program, since it speaks to young girls in particular who needed to get back into the school system and needed a second chance. And sometimes we count people out too early.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the education system must have the robustness and the flexibility to ensure that no child is not provided the opportunity. And this is a different kind of no child left behind, if I were to call it that we saw previously being delivered here in Guyana. So those are some of the points I'd like to touch on this morning. And I don't know if you have any questions, any particular direction you want to lead me in, but I'll definitely be happy to take a prompt or a follow from you.
Thank you so much, Doc. I want to recall. I want to refer to something that you mentioned in the remarks there. The ICT program. I realized that under your stewardship, the ICT program was introduced to the people in the hinterland. I remember you making some remarks about the need for such a program in the hinterland when you spoke at the Arapaima Primary School in St. Ignatius and the St. Ignatius Secondary School, and you actually launched classrooms in those locations. Tell us some more about your experience in that regard, please.
Well, first of all, I have to say that, it was a joint effort, collective effort on the part of the government. So much so that it was His Excellency President Granger who decided to have a ministry that was just dedicated to ICT. We had a minister, the Honorable Catherine Hughes, whose portfolio supported heavily the education sector. And so we were able to make a lot of gains and cover a lot of ground during the time we were in government. Setting the groundwork and laying the infrastructure to have such a program roll out is by no means an easy task. And so, for instance, I've had the privilege of going to St. Ignatius and going to the hinterland communities and to commission smart classrooms and ICT hubs and clubs and so forth. And and it took a lot of work from not only me but from my colleagues, as I pointed out. And I know that those programs in some ways may be continued, and so those that came after us would have the opportunity to continue to open and to roll out the program. I'm happy when I see those things continue, primarily from the point of view because their service intended to benefit the people of this country. And so, as you rightly pointed out, it took a lot of work during the David Granger years of governance to be able to lay the groundwork so that currently we can build on that. And then there came COVID, which makes it more imperative and more necessary as we deliver education using ICT platforms and in some instances using remote means and measures and blended means also. And so I have to say it took the work of a lot of people, not only politicians, but also a lot of people in the ministries that supported this work. I know a lot of people who've had many sleepless nights trying to meet timelines and deadlines and trying to make it happen. And so I think we're in a better place, having benefited from the wisdom and the vision and the leadership of President Granger, and also those that served under his administration and the public servants that work at the implementation level to ensure that we had those programs rolled out.
Wonderful, and I really do admire the trust. I did admire it then, uh, and I admire too the fact that under your stewardship there was the introduction and the expansion of this STEM program. But I know too that while you did your best then, you came in for a lot of sticking, a lot of flacking during the period, especially for, if I remember correctly, when there was, I think, the award of a contract to an overseas company as against, well, an overseas company, totally a non-Guyanese company, as against a Guyanese who was resident overseas at the time. And I don't think you got an opportunity to really clear the air on that. I don't know if you would mind to take this opportunity to tell the people what really happened there.
Absolutely, I'm always open to having frank and fair discussions on issues of public and national interest. I want to say you're speaking about a contract that never did, get awarded. But it certainly was the intention of the Ministry of Education to move in a direction where we were offering robotics and animation to primary school learners, and we wanted it to be part of the curriculum. Um, and so there are different tracks that you run on. I've had the opportunity as Minister of Education to have attended training sessions um, overseas insofar as ICT education delivery was concerned. I also visited MIT and other institutions to see what was happening globally and to get a sense of what needed to be done here in country. Having looked at that, we had to determine what would have been the best approaches, what are considered as evidence based on good practices. And looking at that, what we were looking at the time was to ensure that we implement in the curriculum
Mm.
training at primary. So when you're talking about doing that, you're talking about teachers training, preparation of teachers, preparing, you know, syllabus and preparing worksheet, preparing how you're going to score, how you're going to assess. It involved much more than what was being offered by other competitors at that time. Because yes, they may have been other persons who were working in STEM, and who've had experience, but they were primarily in the areas of more vocational STEM clubs, etc., which I think are pretty important too. But we needed to run on both tracks, and so in order to create a parallel track, you had to go beyond just providing an opportunity to be a member of a club, a class, what have you. And so this required that intervention. And so we had to look internationally to see where we could have sourced that. And it was my intention to ensure that Guyana would have been the first country here in the Caribbean to have implemented that. It didn't quite happen. There was a lot of backlash, a lot of pushback. Um, but who knows? Maybe it will get accomplished on somebody else's watch. But that's where we are. It was never th- it was never my intention to just go and decide who gets what and what. I've never really involved myself or to the extent that I determine or call the shots as to how contracts and that kind of thing would have been awarded. The Financial Management and Accountability Act states very clearly who has roles and responsibilities, and as far as possible, I try to abide by those, and I'm happy to do it. I have been able to abide to a large extent to what was required of me, and sometimes you you're put in a place where you want the greater good for people
Mhm.
who themselves don't recognize that what you're doing really certainly could not be in your own best interest, but in their best interest. And it does makes it a little awkward, but in no way it should serve as a deterrent for public service because when I decided to serve as a minister and to serve in government, I recognized that it was not going to be an easy road, particularly not having had a long background in history in politics. I come from a highly technical background, and so that in itself can create potential barriers. But once you're able to get in and hit the ground running and provide the kinds of support that is needed for whatever sector you may have had the opportunity to serve, I believe the sector and the people of this country would be in a better place. And so you had to look at the big picture and not be too thin-skinned and not be too concerned about yourself. I think with time and with the passage of time, people would recognize that and they will be able to have something to compare and to contrast, and then they can determine if it was time that was well spent, if it was an appointment that was well made, and if the people of this country are in a better place, having benefited from the stewardship and the service of subject ministers in their individual capacity. And in my particular instance, as I said, I didn't come with a law track record in politics. I spent most of my life, however, providing service, not only here in Guyana, but to the extent that I worked internationally also. I provided service. But at the end of the day, we're here to make the world a better place. And to the extent that we can do that and we can account for it, I think for me, that is the hallmark of what life is about.
Well, you would have alluded to the work that you did while serving as Minister of Education and even minister within, I think, the Ministry of Education at some point. Um, Tell us about your tell us about the time you spent as a politician. I mean, was it like you said, you didn't come with a long history of serving in that capacity, and you would have left your professional life to come into the political stream to serve in that regard. How discomforting or how comfortable a choice was it?
Yeah, I have to say that it's an interesting question, and I want to be as honest as I can, but I have to say that it presented me with opportunities as much as it presented me with challenges. We're a networking society, and people tend to go with what they know and who they know and who they have a relationship with. It is what it is. Primarily how we function, and so that can definitely present a challenge for somebody who's new and who's now coming into into a particular sector. Um, but I have to say that I also had a lot of opportunities that I would not have had I not entered into politics, because I would not have been able to implement the policies that I implemented had I just been on the sidelines talking. And sometimes you have to believe in something, and you have to believe in a cause that is greater than yourself. And when you believe in that cause, it is that propels you to get up every morning, to go there, and to make a difference. As it turned out, we spent just one term in office. Nobody could predict how long he or she will be in office. Politics, as you know, globally is characterized as an in and out club.
Yeah.
And so while I was there, I wanted the time to count, and it must make a difference. And I think it did count, and I can say, in as much as there's the tendency to reverse um, policy decisions, and so and there is more a tendency to rewrite the scripts than to reverse what was done in education. And so I'm happy. I look back many days and I'm like, we did this. In fact, when I spoke at the budget, there was nothing new in the budget. Oh, and next time we did this, or something that was promoted under my government when I served under David Grange administration. So I have to say that it's a time that presented both challenges and opportunities, but I think I came out as a stronger person. I've learned a few lessons of life. People are people wherever you go, and you know sometimes things happen the way they happen, but you have to stay focused on the end game. You have to really be committed to the cause. And what I really cherish a lot is the fact that we've changed the lives of ordinary Guyanese people, some of whom I've never met, I've never seen. They don't look like me, and I perhaps may never even meet them. But it is that sense of openness and that sense of going in without any prejudice to deliver service that makes you really feel as though you've been able to contribute in large ways to the development and the betterment of people. We worked under the mantra of a good life for every Guyanese, and it meant a lot to all of us that served as minister. In our own way and in our own style, I think we did what we had to do. Some people fall along different lines based on their own skill sets, their own experiences, and their own opportunities. I decided to stay the course based on my own skill set and my expertise, and I think collectively we were able to bring a lot. The narrative in itself may not suggest that, but I think with time, as people begin to soak it in and to have an opportunity to compare, they would recognize just how much sacrifices we've made individually and collectively to ensure that Guyana could find itself, for a country to even perform as the best in terms of its performance at this CSEC level. It's not something that's happened by wishful thinking. It took a lot of work, a lot of work. Some we may never speak of, publicly, but a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of commitment and a lot of sacrifices. But in public life, you don't work just for the praise and for the credit, and you take the flag when it comes. You put yourself up there and you just run it. So thanks.
I'm happy that you did make mention of a critical point in politics, because quite often, like you said, if you come into the political arena as you did and you're slotted into service as a minister and you're not necessarily known, it presents, you put it lightly, you said you had some challenges. I know it presents immense challenges to the extent that I know the criticisms were heavy and many. I personally was very hard on you when you served as a minister. And
Really?
looking back,
Because I was listening to nothing. I call it chatter. And that you would actually make the points. But sometimes when you really down and working and and you like what you do. I mean, I come from background of service. I was a young army officer, and then I worked for the CDC for over a decade. Then I've worked in government, as you know, for 5 years. Now I work as an international consultant. I continue to provide service to many countries. So you're so much buried down in work that you don't even know that there's that going on too. And that's what I know, because sometimes it really requires a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of work, a lot of commitment. Um, Sometimes I can tell you the staff, they were like, "Oh my God, we need a break," But it's time sensitive. It's in government, you work in terms of your timeline and in terms of term specific. You wanted this to be accomplished in this term, so you just got that amount of time to get that accomplished. If you go on to second term, then you move on to whatever you have projected for that term. So it's a lot of work, very intense work, and I was happy to make that contribution,
Well,
albeit that this was just a short period of time.
we're certainly happy that you did make that decision to serve. I'm looking at some of the comments as we roll, and some people are saying that the nation did benefit a whole lot under your stewardship. It's funny that you mentioned. Well, it's not funny, but it's interesting that you mentioned working with the staff and the staff saying that they need a break and so on. I have always wondered how easy a task it is, or is it, if at all, when you come into an office as you did as Minister of Education, serving in a different administration. Like the staff of the Ministry of Education was serving under the PPP administration, and then suddenly one day they wake up the next day and they're under the APNU AFC administration with a new minister. What was their response to you as the minister then?
Well, it's interesting that you asked another question that caused me to laugh. But I'm not laughing because I'm taking it lightly at
No,
all.
that's fine.
What I have to say is that I, in different sectors, it probably would have been different things happening. But when we came into government, as minister within the Ministry of Education, I went to the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport.
Mhm.
And so when I started out there, I had an interesting experience. I, we were planning something and we were responsible for national activities and all of that. And I said to the secretary at that time, I said, could you bring me a list of the invitee list so that I can see if it needs to be revised, because, portfolios might change. There's a change in that. And it just wouldn't come back into the office. And I'm like, what is this? Is this insubordination? Is this... So if you know anything about me, I'm very proactive. I got up and I went out the door and I'm like, what's going on? I saw her there talking to the PS and they're like, flustered. I'm like, well, what is this? And they're like, oh, Minister, we never did that. That's under the level of Freedom House. I'm like, that what? Because I've worked, I mean, even as a young subaltern in the military, that there is a guest list for this, a guest list for that. I spent time at the U.S. Embassy, there is a yes. And I'm here, this is the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport, and they don't have that. And I said to President Granger, I understand why you sent me here. This is a culture shock. I needed to be in culture because I didn't know that could happen, And so people were not accustomed to operating with a lot of the systems and the guidelines and the rules and regulations that we tried to put in place while in government. And that in itself did provided some amount of pushback and resentment in some instances. But after a while, people started to come around and people recognized that they too can take a lot of pride in their work. Because I would often say to my staff while I worked at that time, that you, at the end of your tenure of service, should be able to say that you've contributed to something that is significant, something that can benefit generations to come. And so it is important that you spend the time to explain why it is that you're doing what you're doing. And I wasn't just there to make your life comfortable or to just give you more work because I felt that you should be looking more busy or any such thing. It was really to create the kinds of systems in place that can efficiently and effectively deliver the services that are needed to make people's lives more comfortable. And so you can understand that if you've worked for 20 years and nobody's asking you for these things, and somebody, you wake up in the morning and somebody come and they ask you, like, oh, something must be wrong with her. What was wrong? I felt as though I was running and people were creeping when I got in, and I had to start to, to manage the pace because we were not in the same place at the same time, and I had to ensure that we synchronize our timings and that kind of thing. Because if you work as an international civil servant and then you're in government in a country where there's a particular attitude and approach towards work and delivery of service, you can understand, you live and work in a different society, and so it's not it's not, it doesn't have to be a stretch of your imagination by any means.
Definitely not. And I definitely am working in one of the systems that is considered to be really tight, very rigid. So I understand the demand for professionalism and everything like that. And I would often say that Guyana has a long way to go, well, to come to meet up to the international standard indeed.
Yeah, it's a process, and we have to have patience, and because we're still a young country. You
Hmm.
know, if you compare 50 something years to 200 and how much ever years and 100 and something, to the developed countries, and you
Hmm.
recognize we're still young, and we have to have the time to grow and the time to develop, and we have to have the patience.
Indeed, wonderful, wonderfully said. You have you I'm not sure if you would have hung up the gloves, as we would say, on the political arena, or well, you certainly not because you're in Parliament still. So, but you would have demitted office as Minister of Education um, under not normal circumstances, anyways. But would you say that you were able to achieve your objectives and accomplish your set goals when you went into the Ministry of Education?
Well, on a personal level, I have to say that the objectives that I had set for that term, in a large way, they were accomplished. We've seen movements. I wanted to see some particular outcomes in certain areas, which I had, which may be a little selfish too, but it's to the benefit of the people. For instance, I wanted to see that we move some subject areas beyond 50% pass rate. To me, that was something I've worked so much of my years in program development, and specifically in public health, but program development can be replicated in
Mhm.
other service delivery areas such as education. I'm like, I can make this happen. All the expertise, I'm considered to be a big specialist, and I can come to this ministry and make things move. And to be able to see it happen, I'm like, yes, there is real value in the expertise, and yes, it can happen. So on a personal level, I was happy to see that we met those measurements. In terms of us working as a government, and the broader level, we really needed more time, because it was a term too that had its own challenges, with the whole no confidence motion and interim government, and people not sure if they should jump or they should run or if they should listen, if you're really the minister, or you coming in here and saying you're the minister. And it was an awkward time, and very unusual circumstances. But we survived it for what it was, and we're here. And I think Guyana, as I said, is a better place, with under the David Granger's leadership, and though short, it was very impactful. And I
Mhm.
think, even as we speak, people are making their comparisons and they're comparing notes, and I'm getting very good reviews and feedback. In fact, people are more appreciative of what I've done after I left office than while I was there. It's like, it's happening. And sometimes I make, a joke. I said, "Oh, you were looking, and that did happen," and that kind of thing. But yes, it is what it is, and as you know, I'm in parliament, so I have political responsibilities and duties, and so I continue to execute those. I shadow the education sector, and so from time to time I make contributions to that sector. Sometimes the environment itself and the level of politics doesn't allow you to make the kinds of contribution that you
Mm.
really can make and should make, because it gets down into it's very puerile behavior lots of time, and sometimes even depending on the maturity and the level of the people who are the office holders, sometimes to communicate can be a challenge, if they don't necessarily connect
Mm.
at the same at perhaps at the same level. It's a challenge sometimes to speak to somebody who may not be able to grasp exactly what it is that you're saying and all of that. And so it's collaboration and communication, and so those are important elements of development. And when people have very abrasive attitude, it puts a further layer of
Yeah.
barriers and things, and so you have to cut through all of that sometimes. And so you know going through the whole political
Mhm.
landscape and the work done so in itself presents all the challenges that we need not have in the first place. Just people making challenges up as they go along. So I'll say that yes, I'm in this parliament, and we'll see where it goes from here. I'm not here to make any big announcements as to how long I intend to serve. Thing. But life, sometimes you wait for the right time to say what you have to say. But I'm definitely happy to serve in government, have served in government, and to be able to contribute now as a member of the opposition to the coalition's effort as we try to ensure that we get back into government as early as possible.
Well, certainly, I must say, one of the things that I've always been saying is that, based on my observation, Guyanese have a diminished appreciation for the value of patriotism. And that I attribute to primarily to the fact that we don't recognize some of the persons that we have who would have contributed to the nation's development and growth over the years as we should. We don't recognize our national symbols as we should. And so that I would like to take this opportunity now to you know reach out and say to you, even though some people might not have said it before, we certainly would have appreciated your service, even though we may not have known about it while you served in the Ghana Defense Force. I think our military personnel need to be recognized, need to be appreciated more. And then I guess if we do that, then the other bits of appreciations may flow in the other directions. One of the things that I thought of while you were speaking was the fact that maybe some of the pushback that you received was because, like me, most persons did not know who Nicolette Henry was, and nobody ever took the time, really. It wasn't Nicolette Henry's responsibility, I think, to tell us who she is. I think it was somebody else's responsibility to introduce the members of cabinet properly to the people. Tell us about how we having this sit down. Something should have been put in place so that you could have had a nice little uh, relaxing sit down and let people get to know who Nicolette Henry was or is. It's unfortunate that you had that kind of reaction from most of us, myself included.
It's okay. It's water under the bridge. We've gone past that. We're in a better place now.
So,
Yeah.
was there any pet project of yours that you had while you served? Anything that you considered your pet and you really worked hard to ensure that it came off?
Well, actually, I was looking at the entire sector, and so it was a big project. There's so many deliverables that you had to get done, and we had to ensure that we meet outcomes that people had more access, particularly in remote and marginalized communities. We also had to ensure that we look at the number of the service delivery points that we were looking at in education. But I have to say that coming from a public health background, I was pretty much preoccupied with looking at school health. And so I spent a lot of time looking at the organization of such a department or unit in the ministry. I also, you probably would know that I had, looked at the welfare department, and we had acquired mobile units to provide
Hmm.
psychosocial support to students, and in some instances to teachers, and even if we had parents. Um, and I'm happy I heard that my or the ministry's psychosocial mobile units are also being used to roll out the vaccination program. Um, so so I felt that that's an important element of students' life and well-being, and something that we don't take seriously enough. I felt like every school should have a session where people understood the value of fire escape drills, the fire drills, so they know how to ensure that if there was an incident, how they're able to evacuate. I also felt that people should be taught basic first aid skills. So we've recruited a physician on board to spearhead that project, someone who's had clinical experience and public health experience. So we've had a doctor who came on, a medical doctor that is, to provide support. And so I was very, very, very I was very strong in my belief and view that students' health and welfare and well-being is an important element of their whole development as we prepare them for adult life. And so even at the level of the COSAD meetings with ministers of education, so I was extremely vocal. I would try to persuade other ministers of education that they should focus on that in their respective countries and so forth. So much so that when I demitted office, I was given an opportunity to serve in an area that is similar to that. So I now provide support to the regional UN's regional program, where we provide support
Okay.
22 countries in terms of comprehensive sexuality education. And that came as a result of my activeness and my involvement and my passion for ensuring that it started out with this whole thing about human life and well
Hmm.
protecting people's life and well-being and health, and when I got into education, I transitioned an element of that in a large way to student population. And so I continue to provide support to ministries of education across the region, Guyana included.
Wow, nice. Oh, guide included. So, serving in the dual capacity there, serving as the shadow minister of education and as somebody who provides that kind of service to Guyana at a regional, I mean, from the UN perspective.
Right.
I know you're a very professional woman. I have picked that up already throughout the conversation. But I want to ask you a very unfair question and allow you to make your comments. Uh, if you were given the responsibility of assessing the current status, standard, everything of the or the current performance of the Ministry of Education, I'm not saying the minister, what would you say about its current state of affairs?
Well, first of all, I would have to caveat it with I know that there is the pandemic, and so people are strong, and people have their issues, and people may not be able to reach full potential. So we know that. So currently, it's underperforming. That's all I wish to say. It's underperforming. I believe that notwithstanding the challenges, we need to look for the opportunities, and where we can make the kind of inroads and impact. There are some opportunities, notwithstanding the pandemic, but every time, I mean, I should be laughing at this. This is
No,
really
that's
serious.
all right. Listen, we having a relaxed conversation, relaxing conversation.
Sometimes it's quite laughable because I would see a big announcement, schools will be reopened, and some days, and I'm like, oh no, they can't reopen school now. We know that. And then they come back 2 days after, and then they say, oh no, we can't open. Well, I mean, we all knew that it couldn't in the first place, but it's a poppy show, and people just want to appear to
Mm.
be relevant when they aren't, and allow the technical and professional people to do what they can do and what they have the expertise to do. So I think with a different focus and a different shift, the ministry perhaps can perform at a better place. But remember, this was a ministry that had 13% of its students passing the national grade 6 examination in 2014 when
Hmm.
the current minister presided over that ministry and there was no pandemic. So to say all of that, I think if I were
Hmm.
to ever judge based on past performance, I'm not surprised to see the level of underperformance that currently exists in the sector.
Wow, I mean that is a very fair assessment. I mean, like I said, it was an unfair question to ask you because it was placing you between a rock and a hard place. I admire the professionalism with which you approached it and responded. Uh, from a professional point of view, as the immediate past Minister of Education, people still, children, school children, I guess, still look to you for guidance in some respects. So, what would you tell Guyana as we struggle to overcome the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic? What will you tell us about the vaccine, about safety precautions and all that, so that we can all up our game and run with it?
Well, first of all, it is really important that you follow the guidelines as are stipulated by the World Health Organization, PAHO, and CARFA in the Caribbean's case.
Mhm.
It's really important. And in terms of taking the vaccine, I have been vaccinated because it is immunization that brought us along, against so many other diseases. So
Mhm.
this is not the first one, but that's a choice that people will have to make. I trust that you choose life. You choose, you choose what you believe will work in your best interest to ensure that you do not become a victim or a statistic for the COVID-19. That's a personal decision. But as I said, from my, if, I want to share with you that I took the vaccine. I've had both doses of the vaccine. So that's a personal choice, and you need to follow all of the precautions. It is real. It is serious. I know people in Guyana would have received mixed messages because at one time we heard that this was something created by David Granger to stay in government. Logically, you really couldn't follow that thought process, but it was said,
Mhm.
and then the same people, they backflip or they backpedal, or I don't know what they would call it, but
Mhm.
they suddenly formed a different narrative when they took over the reins of government. So it's now a real thing, and that does present challenges to communities that are listening to leaders because you want to have consistency in the messaging. And
Yes.
so, as a responsible government at the time, when Guyana had its first case of COVID, we encouraged all persons to take all the necessary precautions that were put in place at that time. And even though we're not in government, it is still our view that people should continue to take all of the precautionary measures as they go about their daily lives and their daily business to ensure that they or their loved ones do not become a statistic to this deadly virus.
It's important that you would have said that too, because I am now even reflecting on the fact that you did mention that you have a public health background, so that should make a lasting impact and a real impression on people's mind. One last question. I've taken you over the program time, over our agreed time. But I have one final question for you. I wish to, before I ask the question, extend sincere condolences to you on the loss of your two very young relatives. And then I would like to proceed to ask, how are you coping? How is the family coping? And how are things with regards to, um, you know, having closure in this matter?
Well, people grieve differently, and it's a personal thing, and so different people are coping with it quite differently. But all in all, along, I get a sense that no one is satisfied with the progress to date, insofar as that is concerned. People have been arrested. It is alleged that those people don't even know where the area is. They've never been to that village and all of that, you know. So when things are not dealt with in a way that justice can be perceived, and apparently more injustice is being perpetuated against ordinary people, it does hurt, and it doesn't lend to any closure. So the family continue to grieve, collectively and at a very personal level. And I want to thank you for asking that question. I want to thank the thousands of people who have been very supportive, and we continue to wait, we continue to hope, we continue to ask for justice to be served. Thank
And I know how hard it is, and I know that I would have touched a very delicate nerve there. I'm so grateful that you were able to, to accommodate the question. Thank you for the time. I'd like to give you make the time to you available to you for any closing remark, because I know you have a busy day ahead.
well, I'd just like to say thank you for having me on your program. I think we did cover a lot of areas here this morning. We covered a lot of ground. We spoke of a lot of things, ranging from performance, ranging from my being in politics, ranging from my views on the sector now, and so we've covered a lot. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity to have this chat with you this morning, and I look forward to if there are potential opportunities for you to engage with me in the future, I'll be happy to do so. So thank you.
You're ever so welcome. I must say thank you for making the time available to. I'd like to tell you just what I have told your colleagues. This platform is available to you at any time that you desire to make use of it, for anything from messaging to program, sensitization, whatever. It's available to, because I decided that since the opposition doesn't have a strong voice in terms of the media in Guyana, we in the diaspora need to make these opportunities available to our people so that they can you can share your message with us around the world. Thank you so much for the time today, and I look forward to talking with you again, and more particularly as the reinstated, well, that's the wrong word, to the reappointed Minister of Education in the new administration.
Well, good morning. Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to us, catching up again some other time. Have a great
Thank you
day.
so much.
Well, thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. That's it.
Yeah, I really enjoy the discussion. I have a new view of the former minister, because those of you who have been following me for a while, and as I did confess to her, you would know that I was extremely hard on the minister. There were some areas that many of us felt, that could have been handled better. But having paid attention to what was disclosed in the discussion, one should come to the realization, as I did, or as I have, that as a rookie politician, so to speak, coming and being thrust into the big office of both Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Education, uh, wasn't easy. And like I did mention, if you're not known, it makes it harder. And I do believe that the fact that she was not known to many Guyanese, to most Guyanese, made it that much harder for her. So I want to thank the Honorable Member of Parliament for sharing her time with us this morning. I hope that you got uh, familiar with her a little more, and you, like I do, have grown to, over the past hour, develop a strong appreciation for what she would have done for Guyana while she served in those two capacities. Even now, what she continues to do for us as a member of parliament, as well as a consultant at the level that she serves. We want to thank you for tuning in. We want to thank you for joining us as you usually do. I just want to remind you that we still have opportunities available to you for um, making a contribution to the continuity or continuation of the show, so that we can, continue the discussions, continue to have these public figures come on board and make us aware of things that we did not, and in some cases still do not know. I still await the response from the Honorable Minister of Health for his appearance, if he's going to appear, because, like the minister said, this COVID-19 thing and the health crisis has nothing to do with partisan politics. This is a national crisis that needs everybody on board. It needs attention from every one of us. So I do hope that he makes himself available for us to have that discussion, and for us to uh, be aware, acquaint ourselves with the ministry's plan to rid Guyana of this horrible and dreaded and deadly pandemic. On Friday morning, we'll be having a discussion with another doctor, Dr. Vincent Adams. He is the immediate past head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Had a lot to do with the oil company and how they operate and all of that. Uh, I don't know why he was gotten rid of. I mean, you got rid of a doctor who is qualified in that specific area to bring who? That's the question. But we look forward to having your company again on Friday morning. But in between now and then, don't forget to drop your little mite, your little token, to show appreciation for us running the show. The Cash App handle is there. You can always go back on the live stream and find the information if you need to make a deposit. The PayPal information is there. The Venmo information is there as well. So I want to wish you a happy Wednesday. Make full use of the day. Smile with somebody as we go along today. Somebody definitely may need a smile. You may lift them. And let us continue to follow the COVID-19 guidelines. Gentlemen out there, respect the ladies. Love the ladies. I mean, we'll fall out every now and again, but that does not give anybody the authority to go beating up on them and killing them. All right? We've got to show respect and love for each other. I'm out for now until Friday morning. Have a very good day.
So we're not in the realm of supposition anymore. We know for a fact that people have voted. We know for a fact that people who are not in the jurisdiction would have voted. We know for a fact that there are 47 ballot boxes without documents. These are facts that are incontrovertible. It's not up for debate. We're not unsure about these things. And so I think the only reason that we ended up at a petition was that the court recognized that while everybody in fact recognized that whilst we have discovered these anomalies and irregularities, the mechanism through which we could address them is an elections petition. So it does not negate the fact of the findings. It does not negate the fact that the PPP has not been able to refute these allegations. And so even with this throwing out of the petition, temporarily, I would say, because I believe we have very, very strong prospects in terms of appeal, the PPP has not convinced anybody that they have not gotten there by illegitimate means. Because the very mechanism through which we were going to receive, as it were, the imprimatur of the court to say that these actions were illegal, it is the same mechanism through which the PPP could have acquitted themselves of these charges. And so these facts remain, and this is what I want to encourage our people. Don't be disheartened by this. The facts are the facts. morning, everyone. Or good afternoon. Well, I was asked to come down to the cybercrime unit this morning in furtherance of my complaint that I made last night at the Brickdam police station against Mr. Roshan Khan for the comments that he put up on his Facebook page calling for me to be marked. And so we had a conversation with the officers, quite professional, took the statements, took the evidence that we had to present. And so I expect that we will hear from them very shortly.
And your own impressions about what Mr. Khan said?
What I found that this is my concern what Mr. Khan has said. And I think everything has to be in context. Over the last few days, we have witnessed women being murdered. Young women being found in shallow graves, etc. And I think it is irresponsible, to say the least, for somebody who was a sitting commissioner on the Ethnic Relations Commission to call for me to be marked, to call for my home to be picketed. I am a woman, I am a mother, and I have a family. What is most distressing is that all of this stems from a misinterpretation of what it is they claim that I said. And I think I have offered a statement on what it is that I said. And I will continue to say at the time that I make that statement about Indo-Guyanese. Now, what is important for me is that this has the potential to take Guyana down a road that I do not believe that we want to go. Because we have so much more pressing issues. We have issues of national concern to look at, and we are being distracted by this firestorm that I believe the PPPC is inciting, and it is dangerous, and it is taking Guyana down a path that I do not think we want to go. And I continue to say that it is intended to distract us from from important issues in our society. We live in a Guyana where up until now, we do not have reliable power supply. We live in a Guyana where we are battling a pandemic. And it is only a small percentage of our children who have access to internet, etc., to take them for them to learn. Do we understand that when this pandemic is over, there is going to be such a learning gap? These are the things that we have to concern ourselves about. And some of the people that are stalking these fires sit in their comfortable homes when GPL gives us blackout, however how many times of the day, their generator comes on. And they are stirring up people who do not have the same luxury. Who do not have